turned off.
That's the mic. That's why.
That's your power.
No, that's not the TV. It's sound system.
Test, test. Okay, we're good.
Okay, let's start smart.
Oh, that's on. Oh, that's on.
Share this mic.
Just turn it off.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, members of the press, and distinguished guests, thank you for joining us today for this press conference. We've gathered here today to share the stories of families living in Gaza who demonstrate remarkable resilience in the face of adversity, and to make an immediate plea for a ceasefire, humanitarian aid, and the end of the occupation. I'm going to start with the land acknowledgement. As always and more than ever, we need to acknowledge that many of us are settlers on this land. It is our collective responsibility to respect and recognize that we are on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Atwandawerin, Haudenosaunee, Huron-Wendat, and the Lenape peoples. We are here because Turtle Island is occupied land just as Palestine is occupied land. In recognizing that the space occupies colonized First Nations, and out of respect for the rights of Indigenous people, it is our collective responsibility to recognize our colonial histories and present-day implications and to honor this land. My name is Leanne Marhiz, and I'm here as a proud Palestinian Canadian and a member of the Canadian Palestinian Social Association, an organization dedicated to serve Palestinians in London all throughout Canada. Today we are here as Palestinian Canadians to share with you the stories of our families. Today you will hear stories of Palestinian Canadians who have already had their family members murdered by Israeli strikes in the last month. Today you will hear stories of those who had their loved ones trapped in Gaza, including those who are Canadian citizens. The present moment for my community is shadowed by pain and darkness, by alienation, dehumanization, and discrimination. Across the country, we witness a rise in anti-Palestinian racism for which we hold our government, starting with Prime Minister Trudeau, accountable, as their stance on Israel unjustly smears Palestinian Canadians as advocates for terrorism. We are denied the sacred right to mourn and express our sorrow for the loss of our loved ones. Our voices and narratives are silenced as we speak out against oppression and occupation. In our interactions with families across various Canadian cities, including London, we've come to face with stories of those who have had lost not just one or two, but upwards of 50 members. Our Canadian identity, like the kufiya and our flag, is a testament to our heritage and expression of our rich cultural identity. To suppress these symbols is to deny us the right to celebrate our heritage. These are symbols of who we are. We are faced daily and for many, many years with the Israeli occupation trying to wipe our identity. We will not allow this to happen in Canada. We will continue to celebrate our Palestinian Canadian identity. Canada's self-proclaimed reconciliation with the Indigenous people of this land is compromised by its disregard for the Palestinian Indigenous Arab population. This double standard in Canada's approach to Indigenous rights exposes a hypocrisy at the core of the nation's moral stance. Our nation cannot champion the rights of this land's own Indigenous people while enabling the subjugation of Palestinians. The government's blind eye to the Palestinian people and Indigenous community fighting for the homeland is an affront to the very principles of justice and equity it boasts on the international stage. It exposes the country's willingness to pick and choose which Indigenous people struggles to support, and it undermines the integrity of a stance on human rights. On behalf of my community, I say to you, we refuse. We urge the Canadian government to take action to stop the violence and prevent the genocide of innocent civilians, and we call for the accountability from Israel for its violation of international law, and we expect our officials to issue a strong sentiment condemning anti-Palestinian racism and access to resources for mental health support for our community. I remind the Prime Minister for the importance of standing on the right side of history. Let us not repeat the mistakes of the past, uphold the rights of all Palestinian people, and extend that same commitment to the Indigenous people of Canada. We have here members who have families in Gaza and the West Bank who will be sharing their stories, starting with Nihal.
My name is Nihal.
and I'm here on behalf of the Canadian Palestinian Social Association of London, Ontario. Today, I'm not only representing my community in London, but I'm also here as a Canadian Palestinian who is directly impacted by the raging genocidal war on Gazan civilians. The impact of this war on my family did not start on October 7th. It actually started when Israel killed my grandmother in the yard of her home in 1967. I never got to know my grandmother. My dad was only 16 years old when that happened. He was the oldest of 7 orphan kids. I have not seen photos of my grandmother, Siti Emne, but I was told she was the prettiest lady in the family, with blonde hair and fair skin, and that my dad takes after her with his fair skin and green eyes. I do, however, have photos of another grandmother, my grandmother Hajar. Shortly after becoming a widower with 7 kids in tow, my jiddi, my grandfather, married Teta Hajar, and she became the mother of the family. She's the only grandmother I have ever gotten to know. I was always her favorite among 30 plus kids in the family. And if you take a look at this photo, we always matched in terms of what we dressed up as. And I think we're pretty cool in terms of our fashion choices. Some of my fondest memories of my childhood was with Teta Hajar. She would let me bake with her fresh pita bread on flat wood stove, or show me the intricate tatriz designs, all the embroideries that she would do on her dresses. Teta Hajar is now legally blind, and she lives in Gaza, and she's over 85 years old. She used to live in the same house that my grandfather left for her. He passed shortly after the illegal blockade in Gaza started. My family and I attempted to visit him and Teta Hajar multiple times, but we were not allowed in because Gaza is under blockade. It's an open-air prison, and Israel didn't let us in. My family and I also attempted to visit my grandfather's grave after he passed away, and we were not let in because of the blockade of Gaza that is illegal, that is enforced by the state of Israel. Back to grandmother Hajar. As an elderly woman with visual impairment, you can imagine how crucial it is for her to be in her home. But because of the continuous Israeli shelling, my grandmother had to be forcefully evacuated, and she's now with cousins in a foreign home, dependent on others for help. I am here to share her story and to be her voice. She deserves to live in her own home, safely, with dignity and comfort. And she needs to be able to see us, her family. She needs to meet my children. Gaza has been illegally blockaded for 16 years by the brutal Israeli occupation, who has been controlling Gaza before October 7, and that continues to illegally blockade and control Gaza after October 7. I am here to ask, as a Palestinian Canadian, that my government demand a ceasefire and lift the illegal siege on Gaza that is inhumanely causing a lot of suffering and pain and destruction to so many people locally and globally. Thank you.
My name is Waleed. I'm 33 years old. I'm a Canadian Palestinian descendant of refugees. That were ethnically cleansed from the city of Ashkelon in 1948. And had to settle in a refugee camp in Gaza. So I lived in Gaza, my friends, my whole extended family, and all my high school memories are in Gaza. I'm sitting here in the relative I'm sitting here in the relative safety of Canada with a burning guilt, seeing every street I ever walked in Gaza get decimated. And my friends and family either homeless, dead, or stuck under rubble. I have cousins that were murdered by the Israeli war machine, and a baby relative that was killed by Israel last week. She was only 4 months old. I have a picture of her, I'm not sure if you can see it. But she's only 4 months old. She was killed in her dad's lap, and sadly, her dad is still alive, but seriously injured. And as a father of a 4-year-old daughter myself, I assure you, I'm sure he wishes that he was killed. Because the pain of losing your 4-month-old baby is far more painful than any injury. Unfortunately, this is far too normal right now in Gaza. I consider myself one of the lucky ones. We just have 1 or 2 relatives that have been killed by Israel. Families are writing the names of their children on their arms so they can easily be identified when Israel murders them. They write it like this. My old high school buddies in Gaza tell me that their kids stop flinching when they hear the sound of bombs because they are so used to it. They tell me that the bomb that will kill you will not hear the bomb that will kill you. So if you hear it, you are safe. These are normal people that live a life like us. They love their kids like we love our kids, and they want to protect their kids like we want to protect our kids. I want to make it clear that Gaza was never at peace during my time there. I saw my own high school. I went to the American International School in Gaza. It's American. Get flattened by Israeli bombardment twice. I was there when a local soccer field stadium was bombed right beside my house. Why? Just because. Collective punishment. Israel gets pissed off, they will bomb a soccer field. For no good reason. There's nothing there. I heard the screams of children, ambulance sirens, a large crowd screaming when a neighboring building to our house was bombed in the middle of rush hour, and the whole entire neighborhood shook. Keep in mind, this is peacetime. This is the time that Gaza is not even on the news. This is just a normal day in Gaza. In Gaza, before October 7th happened, there was still a genocide. It was just a slower genocide. Right now, Israel has just sped it up, but the genocide has been going on since 1948. Ever since I was born, Gaza was a concentration camp controlled by Israel. Everything that came in or out of Gaza is controlled by Israel. I remember waiting 12 hours with my dad to fill up half a tank of gas because Israel decided that the people of Gaza shouldn't get fuel for weeks. Remember, this is peacetime. I remember doing my homework at certain times because Israel fully controls electricity in Gaza and decides when it comes on and when it comes off. Gaza is one big concentration camp with vicious Israeli guards patrolling every inch of it. Israel treated me and my family like less than inmates. We were treated like animals. I remember spending a whole day going store to store because I needed yogurt for my baby brother and there was none. This is peacetime. I remember waiting with my dad at a checkpoint, and my dad is a doctor, he was going to his work, and the Israeli checkpoint, this is before 2005, the Israeli checkpoint was closed for almost 6 hours. My doctor father could not get to the hospital because the sniffing dog that the Israeli army uses needed to take a nap. The dog was more valuable than us humans. And remember, this is all peacetime. This has nothing to do with the war. This is before everything. Despite the suffering I endured, I met the most kind-hearted, generous, and life-loving people in my entire life during my time in Gaza. One more note to consider is that the Gaza Strip is smaller than London, Ontario in size. Imagine being deprived of your rights and not allowed to enter or exit London, and then on top of that, get your water, electricity turned off, and get 15,000 tons of explosives thrown at London. This is Gaza right now. It's a nightmare, and Canada needs to call for a ceasefire immediately. Last year, I was a proud Canadian when I saw Canada stood for human rights so fiercely when Russia attacked Ukraine. I thought Canada was a humanity-loving country. It turned out, unfortunately, that this is a farce. While the same crimes against humanity are happening in Gaza, Canada is a fierce supporter of the Israeli occupation, and I never understood why. Do I not matter? Does my Muslim life not matter as much as a European life, or an Israeli life, or any life? Am I a second-class citizen in Canada? How am I supposed to convince my 4-year-old daughter? How am I supposed to teach my 4-year-old daughter about equality when she is treated less in Canada? If things ever turn sour in Canada, will me and my family eat last because of our life is less worthy? This is what the Canadian government is portraying to me. I truly can't believe that Canada is not calling for an immediate ceasefire and debating its position. Israel cut the water on 2 million people. People are seen begging and rationing water. If you see a thirsty dog in the street, a normal person will give it water. Canada is literally debating whether 2 million people should have water or not. I don't think I'm asking for much. I don't want Canada to be pro-Palestinian. I just want Canada to stand to what Canada always stood for, and that is human rights. This is not right. Canada should demand, and not ask, but demand an immediate ceasefire from Israel and send aid immediately to Gaza. Thank you.
I'm not going to introduce myself because today I am Rana. Rana, my best friend, could not be here. I'm going to tell you the story of my best friend, Rana. Rana came here with her husband and children. In an earlier airstrike, she lost her sister, her 2 nephews, and her unborn nephew that was due the next day. I was there when she received the news. Till this day, I'm traumatized by what happened to Rana when she received that news. Rana's husband, Ihab, a very good friend of mine, went to visit his ailing parents. His father wasn't doing well. He did that a few days before the war broke out. Rana lost her brother in an airstrike. Her whole family home was demolished. She doesn't know where her parents are. They keep moving from place to place to place. Her younger brother, Ahmed, is a leukemia patient. Israel bombed the only cancer hospital in Gaza. Ahmed is without his anti-suppressant medications. Ahmed is dying every day. Her parents have to watch the only child that they have dying in front of them every day because he doesn't have his immunosuppressant medications. Rana lost 2 of her siblings and is about to lose a 3rd one because Israel has us all in a blockade. There's no medication, there's no food, there's no water, there's no fuel for the hospitals, there's nothing in Gaza. It is a genocide, and everybody is watching it happen. These are not my words. It was called a genocide by the UN representatives in New York who resigned, Mukaber, saying that this is a textbook case of genocide. And I quote, these are his words. And the world is watching and not doing anything. The blood of 3,500 children are on our hands if we do not pressure our government to call for a ceasefire. Let me go back to my friend Rana. Rana has 3 children. She has Sama, a teenager. She has Jana, and she has Samar, who she named after her sister that perished in the war. And Samar is now about 9 years old. Ihab, her husband, is stuck in Gaza, who's a Canadian citizen that has not yet heard from our government of how he can leave Gaza. His 3 kids cry every night. They don't eat. His wife tells me they don't eat. She throws food out because they're crying. They want their daddy back. All they see are all the images of people dying. Every minute that passes, a person dies. And if anything happens to Ihab, then all the government's efforts on making sure that the right of Israel to defend itself is valuable, more valuable than our own Canadians coming out, then the blood of that Canadian will be on our government's hand. I feel that the government doesn't realize what's happening in Gaza on the ground. The government is expecting that these Canadian citizens find their way to Rafah border. I don't think they realize that all the roads to the border are blown up. The final road was called the Street of Bahar, or Sea. It was bombed this morning. I have gruesome images that I'm not going to share, and that's the only resort for people to leave that are in the north. Unless Minister Jolie and the Foreign Affairs and the Prime Minister leverage their relationships with Israel to secure the exit of our Canadian citizens from the northern Gaza, they're not going to be able to leave. Ihab will not be able to leave. We have not heard yet. We have not heard, the government has not reached out to Ihab or the 430 Canadians that are there. They're left to fetch for themselves. I don't know why there was a task force that was sent, but that task force has failed us because there have been nationals that have left from Gaza. This is going on day 4. Day 1, not a single Canadian. There were Australians and other nationalities. Day 2, US was able to get its citizens out. So was European countries. Canada, 0. Day 3, a lot more people. Canada, 0. How many days? With every passing day, the chance of Ihab dying increases. And his kids are waiting for him, and our government is not doing what it ought to do, which is bring our Canadian citizens back. We are not second class. We are not second class. Just like we took care of our Canadians from Tel Aviv, we need to take care of our Canadians from Gaza. They have lives, they have families, they have kids that are waiting for them. And knowing Ihab, I haven't said who Ihab is. Ihab is a pediatrician, a neonatologist. He was educated here and practiced here. He is volunteering in a Shifa hospital. A Shifa hospital can be blown at any minute. He is volunteering to save lives of children that are dying every day, of small infant babies. And he's risking his own life because he can be blown up to pieces at any moment. And we know that hospitals have been blown up, and we know that mosques have been blown up, and we know that churches have been blown up. There's not a safe space in Gaza right now. And they have that money. It's not going to be the same Ihab that came back. What he sees, he'll never be the same. I'm calling on the government to bring Ihab back. His family needs him. He's a Canadian citizen. We need him back. Thank you.
My name is Samah. This is my dad. My dad's name is Akram, and he's 73 years old. My father actually went on vacation to Gaza at the end of September to visit his brothers, his sister, nieces, nephews, and spend some time with the family. On October 8th, his vacation turned into a nightmare for him and for us. All of a sudden, he is witnessing bombings and buildings destroyed near my grandparents' house. My grandparents' house is in the northern Gaza. It's in Rimal, where the bombing started. Running for their lives, my father and his brothers moved to Tal al-Hawa in order to stay safe. But Tal al-Hawa got bombed over and over, and they had to leave. I thought perhaps since Al-Jala was already bombed, that it would most likely not be bombed again, so they moved there to seek shelter from the bombings and the airstrikes. Well, you can have guessed, they were bombed there too. I lost a cousin and her whole family, all killed in an Israeli airstrike that destroyed their building on top of their heads. Was there a safe place to run to in Gaza? They said, go south and you'll be safe. My dad, my uncle, and his family moved to Khan Yunis, south of Gaza, where they were welcomed by my uncle's in-laws. The situation got worse there. Many families were housing other families, to the point where one house would have over 40 people under one roof, of whom some of whom weren't even relatives. Those families had to share the water and the food. Supplies were getting very low. Bakeries were bombed, and so were the homes of people who welcomed other families from the north, who were seeking safety and shelter. But with the limited amount of food and clean water and the constant bombing that was taking place in Khan Yunis, my father and my uncle decided to go back home, because if there was no safe place to be, then they would rather die in their own homes, where they grew up, and they have so many memories. So they moved back up north to Ariman. My father was known for his love for life and good health. It all turned into fear, agony, and deteriorating health as a result of the continuous bombing and lack of clean water and food. As my father was heading up north, the road connecting north to south was bombed and destroyed, drawing a line of separation between the north and the south. We would go for days without a word, sometimes because of the limited or no connectivity and connections available on the ground. We tried to call him daily to check on him, because we don't want him to lose hope, and we don't want to lose hope either. He once told my mother, if I don't return, make sure you give this person this and that. A man who was once full of life and big dreams for his family is now losing his health and trust in his government. My parents brought us to Canada 32 years ago and has since proudly called Canada our home. He would ask me, what is the government doing? When are they going to rescue us? Are you communicating with the right people? There's no way this is the Canada we all know. With the legacy of peacekeeping, this is not the Canada I grew up in. Not at all. He once said, "Tell them they are bombing us. Did you tell them I'm in danger?" Little does he know that we did, and we are doing it. Last weekend, they heard that houses on their street were going to be bombed. And so everyone living on that street had to seek shelter and safety in a nearby hospital on the hopes that it will not be bombed. Many families were overcrowded in that hospital to stay safe from the bombing. This picture was taken my dad's birthday. My brothers and I have exhausted every possible means to reach out to the government. We have filled out numerous SOSs forms, sent many emails, and made many calls to the Canadian Embassy in Egypt, Global Affairs Canada, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, to our local MPs. I have been in touch daily with our local MP, Ariel Kayabaga, who has been trying to get us information about Canadians' evacuation efforts, but no answer. No answer. This lack of transparency on the part of our government has left us frustrated, helpless, and hopeless. No answers, no plans. We don't even know what is going on behind the scenes. Canada was able to ensure the safety of Canadians who were in Israel, and 19 full flights carrying Canadians got their families to their homes safely. Yet, we only heard of one single Canadian who managed to cross over through the Rafah border since the start of the war in Gaza. And that was by mistake. His name wasn't on the list. And I know of a family that tried to leave and their name wasn't on the list and they weren't allowed to leave. We watch the news and see thousands of foreign passport holders leading through the Rafah borders, Europeans, Americans, and other nationalities, but not Canadians. Not Canadians. Where is our influence? Where are you, Trudeau? Why isn't our government calling for a ceasefire? Why? Why isn't our government worried about Canadian citizens in Gaza? Are they considered second-class citizens? Are we now second-class citizens? Because growing up, I never felt I was a second-class citizen. Are they not important? This is my question to the government. Are our families not important to you? Are those Canadians not important to you? Ceasing fire will not only ensure an end to this genocide, but also safety for our family members and loved ones currently there. How many more deaths will there need to be for our government to take action? How many deaths? My father is currently stuck in northern Gaza, and the road to southern Gaza has been destroyed and is very dangerous to go through. My question to our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, is how will you ensure a safe passage for my father and the many Canadians isolated up in the north? For them to reach the borders in the south, we need to find a solution. My father and many Canadians in this situation, like Dr. Ihab, will need a safe humanitarian corridor through possible partnerships with a UN agency or Red Cross to get them from the north to the south safely. Because it's not safe. It's a death sentence if you take that road. I hold the Canadian government responsible for the lives of Canadians in Gaza. Our government is currently failing us, and I call upon Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Minister Melanie Joly to call for an immediate ceasefire and intensify efforts to bring our beloved father home safely, because we miss him and because his grandchildren miss him dearly. And we pray every day for his safe return home. I spoke to my dad this morning, and it's always questions. Did you talk to anyone? What's going on? Are we getting out soon? And I have no answer. I have no answer for my father. I'm here to share his story. And we're all here to share our stories. And hopefully that will make a difference and change some opinions in our government. Thank you very much. And those are some pictures of my father with his grandchildren. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Firas Abu Shamala. I want to preface this by saying this is one of the hardest things that I've ever had to do. That's because that the emotions are inevitable. But our friends and family and fellow Palestinians, they don't have the luxury of displaying the emotions that we display 9,000 kilometers away. And that's why this is so hard. So I want to thank everyone here for telling the stories. As of yesterday, November 2nd, 11,212 Palestinians have been murdered. Not died, murdered. Which over 4,500 children have been separated from their innocent souls. Among those fortunate enough to be spared a proper burial, or are still buried under the rubble, 39 of them share my last name. Uncles, aunts, and cousins, faces that I've known my whole life. 17 of those 39 were infants, still learning their first words. My family is not Hamas. My uncles were not Hamas. My cousins are not Hamas. Those children were not Hamas. Why did they die? The Jabaliyah refugee camp is a place of security and protection under the direction of the Israeli military. It was bombed on October 31st. As if luring and killing 400 innocent civilians wasn't enough, the Israeli state bombed it a second time, yesterday. Our political leaders would be quick to justify Israel's actions and that there must have been Hamas soldiers operating from this refugee camp, which Israel advocated as a place of safe harbor to begin with. There are videos of the bombs landing in the camp, and countless children who were innocently playing on the streets of their so-called secured playground were shown running for their lives before the picture turned to a dark mass of nothingness. And just today, a school sheltering children and innocent civilians was bombed. For the medical experts among us that are listening and watching, the hospital patients, half of which are children, are intubated without working ventilation systems. I watched from 9,000 kilometers away as a little boy named Yusuf undergoes surgery to his stomach without anesthesia. He is wide awake and asking only if his parents are alive. The others, who are more fortunate than Yusuf, lay on the floors of the hospital hallways. The floors of the hospital hallways with the ends of their limbs tied with rags to avoid excessive bleeding. The justification by the major Western media outlets, including the government's, our government. Around the world who support these crimes depict that this is a war against Hamas. And let me be very clear. This is not a war against Hamas. I echo my Jewish friends who have the backbone that many Western leaders, including my own, do not have and still decide to speak on their behalf. Jewish safety and the Palestinian freedom are not opposing causes. I thank every Jew across Canada and the United States and elsewhere who are true to the religious teachings and protest against the unfolding of these atrocities. However, none of this seems to matter. None of what I speak of will resonate with our political leaders who can stomach the images of thousands of children dying before their eyes, and yet they still speak of unconditional support of the Israeli state in a tone of matter of fact, despite knowing deep in their hearts, they certainly know deep in their hearts that what's occurring is a genocide against the Palestinian people. And by choosing to stay silent in support for a ceasefire, Canada choosing to stay silent in support of a ceasefire, this is what the country that I live in, support, and contribute to is encouraging. And it will continue to happen as long as our leaders say things like unconditional support for Israel, and as President Biden foolishly put it, Palestinians are simply exaggerating their pain. There must be a ceasefire. Canada must lead the world at the forefront and call an end to this madness before the worst is yet to come. Thank you for listening to me. Just another Palestinian exaggerating his pain to you all.
My name is Reem, and this is my story. My grandparents are from Jaffa. In 1948, they ran for their life. And my mother was born in Egypt. This was the Nakba. They lost any hope of ever going back to Jaffa, Java, where my family comes from, my maternal family. In 1967, my father, an elite in Gaza, went to study in Egypt. 1967, he was in university when the war broke out. Whoever was out was out. Whoever was in was in. My father lost his right of return. Even though all his family is in Gaza, he couldn't go back. They both met in North Africa, in Libya, where I was born. And my father did his very best to visit his family back home as much as he could, every second year. My best childhood memories were in Gaza. The love that I felt in Gaza, I've never felt anywhere else in the world. The generosity, the love, the happiness, the land. My family are farmers and fishermen. It's a very simple life. We're very close to the beach. And so my childhood visits were on the beach with my cousins, playing, running, eating. And then my parents decided for a better option to go to the Gulf States for a better future, and we did. And then it was time for me to get educated. I was the eldest of 4 siblings. My father at that time could have sent my brothers, all 3 of them, to Europe to get educated, where a lot of European countries would take those stateless Gazans, those stateless Palestinians, into schools. but I wouldn't have an education because he wasn't going to send his daughter by herself to Europe somewhere. My father wanted me to be a physician. That was his dream. And because of that dream, he immigrated to Canada so that I can get an education. My father sacrificed everything so that I can get educated. He was estranged from us for years so that I can get educated. And I did. I went to 2 post-secondary educations. I got an education and became a professional. And I'm working in a hospital as a pharmacist. But I couldn't visit Gaza anymore because in 2007, only those who have what is called the Hawiyya can visit. And I didn't have the Hawiyya. I lost that right. I couldn't visit. For years, I've been estranged from my cousins and my uncles and my aunts and everybody that I love so much. Until last year. Last year, I took my kids, my father, and we went after years of not being able to see them. I had dreamed about that day for years. It was the only hope. The only thing I ever prayed for or called for was to go to Gaza and see my family. The reunion was like none other. But on the second night, war broke. My mom calls frantically, please come, please come. In order to enter Gaza, I had to pay $750 American each person so that I can enter. Because I'm not allowed to enter. And we did. And the second night, the war broke. And for the first time, my children, who are second-generation Canadians, got to know what war is like. Thank God it was short-lived. It was a few days and it was over. And we were able to enjoy that trip. We went to the beach. This is the happiest place on earth for me, the beach. This is my family. Do you see the happiness there? This young girl, this is a young dentist for my family. One of the few well-educated people from our family, mashallah. I'm very proud of her. In this picture, there's a university professor, university graduates. This is my family. They're few of the highly educated people in Gaza, because in Gaza you have one thing only. You go to school and you get a degree. Do you do anything with it? No. You're unemployed. Why? Because you're in prison. No, you're not in prison because that means that you are incarcerated, or there's negative connotation. Some have said that it's like being in a concentration camp. That's probably more like it because they have done nothing wrong, but they can't get work. So they have degrees, they're bright and beautiful, but they can't get jobs because they're occupied. Nothing comes in, nothing comes out. This is us in my grandfather's house. This is me with my family, just enjoying tea and coffee, just sitting at night. There's no electricity. That's why it's dark. There's probably just a few lights, LED lights I think they have. This is another picture of us sitting on the patio. See this? The style? The style was laid by my grandfather, who died years ago. This is the happiest place on earth for me, and that place is no longer there. We live in the north. The north is gone. My family, who lived so many times under bombing in their homes, had the leaflets drop on them. You have to evacuate, and they did. They went to schools there nearby, and in less than 24 hours, they were told, you better go south of the valley, of the Gaza valley. There's no fuel, there's no cars. My uncle is almost 80 years old. He can't move, he has diabetes, he's got blood pressure and all diseases. My aunts, so they had to help all the children so that they can go from one end to the other. 30 kilometers on their feet, walking, sleeping in the middle of the night, in the openness, until they get to schools in the south. And do you think they're safe in the schools in the south? Do you know how many times my cousins told me they almost lost their lives because they're going to the market to get water for their kids? My cousin tells me my daughter is very hungry and thirsty and I have to go buy her something. The little that there is to be bought, every time he goes to the market, he's risking his own life because bombs keep coming down in the market. This is Lamb. And this girl stole my heart. She's my cousin's daughter. She stole my heart. We're in the graveyard visiting her grandpa, who's my uncle. Because he died when I couldn't see, and I said when I go back, I want to pay my respect for him. Her father is a nurse in one of the hospitals that have been issued orders to evacuate because it will be bombed. Her father, my cousin, like all other physicians and nurses, decided he will not leave his patients. He will not desert his patients. Every morning, I wake up to see that they hit the hospital. Will she be orphaned? And I send him messages and wait for him when he's in the hospital to say I'm alive. That is not fair. There are 4,000 children. Some of them are dead and they've been buried, and some are still under rubbles because we don't have machinery to be able to get them out. How many more children need to die before we cease fire? How many more children? What's the number? What's the magic number, Mr. Trudeau? What's the magic number? Enough is enough. These are our families. They have stories, they have lives, they have names. This is my family. I have 4 kids. I have 4 children. 2 of them are at Western. My daughter is a second-generation Canadian. When Sheikh Arish was fired, she stood very strong and said, no, bring him back. When she was asked, a reporter, for her interview, my second-generation Canadian daughter changed her last name. My second-generation Canadian daughter decided to use a different name because she's scared of persecution by administration of Western. This is not right. This should never happen. This is Canada. This should never happen. We are not second-class citizens. Islamophobia has raised 1,300% according to NCCM. This is not cool. This is not right. This is not the Canada I immigrated to. This is not acceptable. Mr. Trudeau, this is not right. We will speak up, and we will not stop. We have a right. But all my colleagues, my friends, everybody I know, they say one thing: we have never felt less Canadian than we do now. We have never felt that we're less human than we have felt now.
My name is Nadine, and I'm from Khalil, West Bank, Palestine, known as Hebron. I want to start off by saying what I'm going to share with you guys today is only scratching the surface of the suffering my family and I and all Palestinians have suffered. The massacre in Gaza has impacted all of our families across Gaza and the West Bank. The Israeli government has given the illegal extremist settlers the green light to kill, kidnap, and harass any Palestinians they see. These terrorist Israeli settlers have killed over 100 people since October 7th in the West Bank. In my city, Hebron, fathers and sons have been kidnapped from their homes, beaten, stripped, and humiliated by the Israeli occupation force. This is not new behavior, as my own brother has been stopped by the IOF in previous years and made to strip for simply not carrying his ID, the Hawiyah she was mentioning before, which is an Israeli identification that they create for Palestinians to track us. Yet, what we are seeing today is a continuation of the brutality to the Palestinians. My aunt recently had 10 Israeli occupation soldiers break into her home while she was asleep, surround her bed, and tell her to stay silent and that they are looking for someone. My dad just got back from the West Bank and told us children from our neighborhood were killed for throwing a rock at the watchtower. Every city and village in the West Bank has an Israeli watchtower and checkpoint, which serves to make our lives harder and to continue their apartheid and occupation. When I was in Palestine, I had to go through checkpoints to go to school in Bethlehem and constantly was late or had to miss school. As my family and I were coming from my cousin's wedding, from Ramallah, and we were in a bus and I saw an Israeli occupation force and their vehicles entering a village. And at the time, I was really into Snapchat, so I took out my phone and I was just videotaping them. And my sister looks at me, she's like, Nadine, stop, Nadine, stop. And I look at her and she literally has a red laser on her forehead. I quickly shut the blinds and I threw away my phone. If that Israeli soldier was trigger happy, I would be without my sister today. Today, I have this photo of my grandparents I never met. Sorry. They were killed by the Israeli occupation force, leaving my mother orphaned when she was 9 years old. Due to the murder of my grandma had to work and she ended up getting in a car accident that left her paralyzed from the waist down and suffering a year while she had to take care of 5 children, and she passed away. This would have never happened if my grandpa was never beaten to death by these Israeli soldiers. My mother and her siblings had to go to Dar al-Tifl in Jerusalem, which was founded by Hind Husseini in 1948, who donated her house to become a shelter and nursery to orphan children in 1948 because of the massacre in Deir Yassin. My father was exiled for 17 years because he went to study in Algeria. Imagine 17 years not being able to see your parents grow old or celebrate any holidays and birthdays with your siblings. And one other story, a family friend who lives in the old city of Hebron, which we call a ghost town. They are one of the only Arab households living there, in between illegal Israeli settlers who took over Palestinian homes. The stories that I heard are heart-wrenching. For instance, breaking into their home and throwing a Molotov cocktail on their baby. She lost her baby. Another time, breaking into her home and throwing a Molotov cocktail, and because of the mother sniffed it, she had her baby that was in her stomach died, was killed. These are just 2 stories of the amount of pain that they have suffered by these illegal Israeli settlers. For by the way, most of them are American, Canadian, European. What Israel is doing today in Gaza and the West Bank is a continuation of the ethnic cleansing that began in 1948. Enough is enough. These are our families. We have hopes and dreams. My mother and I both suffer from PTSD, depression, and anxiety. This is a direct result of trauma and intergenerational trauma. Every Palestinian has a story, one of loss and grief. It is exhausting to live here where our own government in Canada is supporting our oppressors. We are mourning our people, yet having to educate people and prove our humanity in existence. We cannot mourn in peace while the mainstream media continues to lie and frame this as a war. This is a genocide. Our governments and Canadians must speak up because history is repeating itself. You are either complicit or calling to an end to the genocide of the Palestinian people. It's that simple. This is not a war. Thank you.
I just want to leave with one. Right now, in Gaza, there's nothing coming in. There's no water, there's no food. Gaza on a normal day gets 500 trucks of aid because we're in a prison. We're in an open air prison or concentration camp, whatever you want to say. There have only been 20 trucks coming in. There's no medicine, I said that. There's no food, there's no water, there's no fuel, there's nothing. Everybody in the north, and no electricity, of course. Everybody in the north will die. There's already dehydration, cases of dehydration. Diseases are spreading. I know from my family there are 70 people in a classroom. There's already GI. The water that they drink has floaties, stuff floating in it. It's not clean water. This is what Ihab is drinking. This is what his wife told me is drinking. In the schools, they don't have any water to clean. Imagine, there's anywhere between 2,000 to 7,000 people living in a school, depending if it's an UNRWA school, which they'll provide food for, or a government school, which no food comes to. And all the food is cans. You know what they eat? Dates. Their breakfast is dates. Their lunch is a can. And the dinner, whatever. The one concern is there's no bread for the kids. The kids cry, they want bread. There's no more bread. There's no flour. They hit every bakery. You've got 2,000 people to 7,000 people crammed in a school, using a school with no water for sanitation. People are GI tracts. People are throwing up. Enough is enough. End this craziness. Cease fire now. Thank you.
What?
No.
Yeah. Let's make that clear right now.
We need to confirm this.
It is confirmed.
On Al Jazeera?
Everybody in the comments, it's clear.
So we just heard that Al-Shifa Hospital got bombed, which is the main hospital in Gaza. And it's on Al Jazeera Live right now.
My uncle too.
It's Q&A. So if you guys have questions, we'll get them answered.
My uncle's a doctor at Al-Shifa, and he hasn't seen his family for the past 25 days. He hasn't seen his family, he hasn't seen my aunt or his kids for the past 25 days because he can't leave the hospital and leave people behind. There's one hospital that's functioning right now, and it's a Shifa hospital. There's one hospital that's functioning, and it's a Shifa. It's the biggest hospital and the only hospital. حسبي الله ونعم الوكيل. حسبي الله ونعم الوكيل. حسبي الله ونعم الوكيل.
Do you have a question? Do you want this?
No, I need to get everybody's name.
Absolutely.
Do you have a list?
I do. Yeah. Are there any questions on the live, Maria, that we need to take?
Does anybody on here have any questions for any of the panel that's speaking? If there's any questions, please ask now.
We're good?
Yeah.
Well, thank you for coming, and thank you everybody for being so vulnerable and raw and sharing your emotions. I'll give you the names and we'll call it a day.
Yes, please. Oh, no way. It's the entrance area.
Yeah, I just ordered it. I mean, it still doesn't matter.
There's an ambulance that got affected.
Yeah, the ambulance. But they said that they don't bomb the hospital. Meanwhile, they're doing that.
It's not the first time, unfortunately.
What?
No, I said it because I wanted it.
You should take off the last name.
You think?
Just in case.
They did say them in
On
the
this
most of
one.
them at least. Okay, absolutely. Do you want your last name to show them or no? And do you know you're comfortable with the last name showing? Yeah.
Not even.
They said
The
the
reason I
name
wrote
is accepted,
this
but he
is
doesn't want
this,
his last name to show.
when you say it out loud.
Do you know how much?
Everybody.
Dismissed late, so what? Mine wasn't. Maybe I'm sick and it doesn't look like it's burnt.
I just,
صاروخ استهدف بوابة مجمع الشفاء الطبي مدينة غزة.
6 شهداء.
So far عشرات بين شهيد وجريح.
Still going. لا هي عشرات.
يا عشرات الشهداء والجرحى.
What do I do? I'm not
Do you wanna-
How do you stop
Do you want to stop it?
Yeah.